watching The Producer's Room, a streaming web series featuring the creators behind the hit songs of today's music industry. Songwriters, music producers, and artists discuss their creative process as well as examining current issues and technologies in today's rapidly changing music business. Your host is producer, songwriter, and educator Dave Tuff. Welcome to The Producer's Room. Welcome to this episode of Producer's Room. Once again, we are here from Nashville, Tennessee at the Voltage Exchange Mastering with Duncan Ferguson, and he is the owner. And I'm pleased to bring you this episode because we have not had a mastering engineer yet on the show. And Duncan is just going to tell us all the cool things about mastering and being a mastering engineer in the current environment. So we're going to get into some technical stuff, but we're also going to cover some business type questions and get Duncan's background. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Duncan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start out, because I know that you're a McGill grad. You've kind of been all over the place. Just kind of give me the background. Like, where did you grow up? How did you get into mastering? I know it's probably a long path, but you can kind of give us the journey to where you are now here in Nashville. So
I grew up in northern Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Okay.
And I have the standard story. I was a bass player in a prog rock band.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And that band, when in high school, we cut an album at a local studio. And,
Yeah.
when I was in the studio, I got hooked on recording. And I then sought out a college that offered a way for me to do sort of sound technology.
Sure.
So I went to a tiny little arts college in the middle of Michigan called Alma College.
Okay.
And I basically was just handed the keys to a recording studio.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was the only student working on that, and I could do a double major between music and music technology. And I ended up doing like all of the ensemble recordings on campus. I sort of was like the guy that when anybody needed a recording for anything in the music department, I was the go-to.
So you developed that reputation of the go-to guy on campus.
Yeah.
And so then, so you went to college, and obviously you graduated.
Yeah.
And then did you work a few years before you went to McGill, and how did you make that decision to go to McGill?
I was doing a lot of classical recording, and there was actually a professor who was adjuncting at Alma, but she was from the University of Michigan, and she was a clarinet professor, and she said, "Hey, I think I end up doing a recording for her for a jury, some sort of academic thing." And she said, "These recordings are really good. I have a friend who went to the McGill program, and it looks like you might be a really great candidate.
Oh, wow.
You should look into it."
Sure.
And just on a whim, she said that, and I looked into the program, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there's no way I would be able to get in," or because they have so many applicants.
Uh-huh.
And I had all the requirements within my music technology degree to apply in terms of like portfolio recordings and all that. And so I applied and I got in.
Wow.
So it was like, I didn't expect that. It was sort of like I was planning on going into the live sound industry pretty heavily. I had a lot of internships with live sound companies.
Sure.
And I had toured with a few groups sort of as like one-off front of house gigs. And but because I got in the program, I went and worked, did a master's degree in sound recording at McGill.
So for our audience that doesn't know about McGill, can you tell us a little bit about the reputation? I know they're one of the only schools that offers a tone meister, but we may not even know what that is. But what was your actual degree?
The actual master's degree is called sound recording, and it's based on the whole tone meister system. Okay. And Martha DeFrancisco is an actual tone meister who teaches there, and she used to work for Philips, and has a roster of just a wonderful classical recordings, and she was she was wonderful to study under. Also, there's a man who created the program there called Wislaw Wojciech.
Okay.
And he's himself is an incredible engineer. And then the other two faculty there were George Massenberg and Richard King, which both George and Richard have their own.
If you don't know those names, look them up because you should know them, right? So a world-renowned faculty, both in classical and then, of course, those other gentlemen, pop, rock, all of that. And so you probably studied everything there, right? I mean,
Absolutely. I felt like absolutely everything. I had to do a prerequisite program. So I spent 3 years living in Montreal, and in that prerequisite program, they know you're coming in as like a music major, and then they kind of like beef you up on like you had to do like physics and electronics. And then I had to reapply to the master's degree again with that background
Okay.
and to be reaccepted, So,
Interesting.
yeah.
So they require certain undergrad classes in the physics or electronics or whatever.
Yeah.
And so just curious for the students watching this,
Yeah.
if you came to it from the exact opposite, maybe you came to it from an electronics physics background, can they beef you up on the music part to get in? Or?
I think you'd have to like figure out a way to I think they look for people with a strong music and recording background, and then they look at like what's missing in their physics and electronics.
So that's the Tone
Yeah.
Meister.
Yeah.
Again, for the people that don't know, it combines the music and the science together for the engineering. And so, I mean, there's so much we can talk about how much I'm sure y'all did really cool experiments and all that there. But my main question is, how did that lead you? And maybe there's several things between there and here, but to becoming well known in Nashville as a mastering engineer.
I think actually the mastering came about in my undergraduate. I had to master the things that I was working on because I didn't have any other option.
Right.
And I really dived into that process, be like, okay, what? I had no idea what it was.
Right.
And I actually wrote in my application to McGill that I was going there for critical listening.
Oh, wow.
And because of the faculty. And I really, when I was done with it, I'm thinking mastering would be my. So I kind of went into that based on.
Sure.
I don't know. There's not really a wonderful explanation.
Sure.
I just fell in love with mastering.
Calling you. Yeah.
When I was forced to do it on my own recordings in my undergraduate.
Right.
Or on the recordings that I was doing for people. So
then did you throw a dart at the map and you saw Nashville, Tennessee, or did you have friends here? Or?
Long story is I actually during my undergraduate I had 2 internships in Nashville.
Oh, okay.
One on Berry Hill at East Iris Studios, which is now the House of Blues complex.
Was Jay Joyce there, or was that before? Anyway. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also interned on a small demo studio on Music Row called Bayou Recording.
I remember Bayou.
Are
they still there?
They no longer exist.
Yeah,
but Joe Spavi and another guy named George Clinton, not the George Clinton.
Right.
Yeah. They owned it and ran it, and Joe is still in. I think he's still in the Time Jumpers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it's Fast and Furious in the Nashville demo world.
I was a tape op. I was just literally like slinging reels off and on the machine and rocking and doing all that. Yeah,
right.
It was. I learned a lot in that one.
Yeah,
and that was in the summer of 2007. And I sort of left Nashville after that summer, being like, it's so saturated here. I'm not sure I'm not sure what
a lot of competition
what the future
and everybody
is,
doing stuff.
Things. And I had to finish my degree as well. And then when I left McGill, I had got offered something in New York City for a mastering opportunity, and I looked at the prices of like living in New York,
sure.
and it was like, oh, I don't know if I want to, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then, ironically, a band who I toured with called me, who lived in Nashville, and said they needed like a front of house engineer and a road manager. Like they were behind on their bookings and all that. And it was like the day that I graduated. So I took the opportunity, and that's what brought me to Nashville. So
at first you were doing live sound, which you still will get into. You still do just a little bit of, right? But I've heard also the chops sometimes you develop as a live engineer. You're kind of having to make those split-second decisions, and those actually help you become a better studio engineer as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a piece of that.
Yeah,
sure. I got into, because of some of the research that we did, not to go in deep here, that we did at McGill, I was really familiar with a program called SMART.
Yes.
Because of that, when I came to Nashville, I could, after I helped out that band that hired me for that first summer, I could go to a sound company and say, hey, I already know how to use SMART. I had a skill set that I could immediately be thrown in and tune PA systems really efficiently.
Sure.
And so I got a job right away working for a company in Brentwood, and I was a system tech. I flew PA systems and tuned them for a good set of years.
Great. That's great.
And the critical listening is kind of related to mastering in that world.
Sure.
But yeah, so.
Well, all right, let's jump into some more. So now you're in Nashville.
Yeah.
And then how do you become an entrepreneur starting your own? And we're going to, by the way, audience, we're going to show more of Duncan's room here. I know you can only see pieces of it right now, but, mastering console, and then your speakers are kind of behind the cameras right now. But how do you get to starting your own facility, and was there steps there?
Mastering was always a dream. And I had a full-time salary job with a live sound company. I was touring a lot. And this sort of like was my side passion, and I built the room knowing that I would turn it into a full-time job at some point.
Sure.
And so that was just I sort of built it very slowly. I built up a clientele very slowly, not being full-time. And then the goal was to then just sort of like let the balloon go and be able to just dive into it. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Okay. So now in your current, role here as the owner, operator, proprietor, entrepreneur, you're mastering all types of music. It's not just classical or anything like that, but you're just whatever's thrown at you.
Every genre. I mean, being in Nashville, you end up seeing certain, the Americana,
organic
country. Actually, any sort of recording that's been done in a studio live, with some live element to it, we see a lot more of that here.
Sure.
Which actually, that was part of the allure of staying in Nashville was because of my classical background. Mm-hmm. Getting recordings where you have to deal with some sort of a live mic that's even from on the end of the mastering side, like having that I was a lot more familiar with from my background.
Yeah.
So Nashville just seems like a really good fit in the studio world.
Yeah. And so you just get clients. I mean, a lot of it's obviously word of mouth, but they also can go to your website, which is thevoltageexchange.com.
Yep.
Or is okay.
Yep.
So, and hire you that way, be anywhere in the world. I think that's a great thing about being a mastering engineer is you can get files from all over.
Yeah.
Now that we have this thing called the internet, it's awesome. So I want to jump into, because what fascinates me is number one, let's try to answer this question. I know it's probably an ambiguous question, but for our audience watching, what is mastering? Let's start there.
Oh, this is awesome. It's the most asked question.
Okay.
Everybody thinks it's one thing and it's really another thing
Right.
per se. Really, mastering is just it's the transfer process. You're transferring mediums. You're going from whatever the mix was mixed on to whatever it's going to be distributed on.
Okay.
So we're the linchpin between the creative process and the distribution or the manufacturing.
Yeah, right.
So whether that was, mastering really developed, when they had to transfer the mix from the mixtape to get it onto like a lacquer.
Sure.
And get that lacquer.
Which we're going to talk more about that thing behind you here in a little while. So,
and that's how the mastering engineer came about.
Right.
Was they were transferring mediums, and the goal at that time, was to try and get it to sound as close as you can to how it sounded in the mix to then on the actual medium, which is sort of like this day and age, I call it sort of like a Photoshop.
Yeah.
You're like the Photoshop. I'm trying to get this giant Mona Lisa that you've painted, on this big canvas at 96K, 24-bit, or whatever you've done.
2-inch tape or
and
whatever
then
it was. Yeah.
Kind of, color correct it down to like 44:116, so you got to take the Mona Lisa and put it on like a cardboard, postcard.
Or today, MP3 128 or streaming or whatever.
And we sort of do these enhancement and color corrections to get it to sort of feel.
Well, that's a fascinating answer because I wouldn't have expected that. That wouldn't have been my answer, but I'm not a mastering engineer. That's great.
Because of the industry, there's some other things that go along with that. Like we can enhance certain things, or we can sort of add to energy or take away energy or anything you want to really make the music sound its absolute best from mix to the distribution.
Wow. So let's talk about some of that other smaller stuff. Like, for instance, it fascinated me that you could go in. By the way, mastering, you're mainly dealing with the 2-track, right? So the stereo, just letting our audience know, the stereo mix has already been done. You've taken the 100, 200, 300 maybe, hopefully not, tracks. Yeah. Funneled those down to a 2-track mix. Now you get the 2-track mix, but it fascinated me that you can do things like de-essing when you're talking, like how can you do de-essing on a vocal when you only have the 2-track mix? But I know you did stuff like that. You were fixing some errors in another session I saw. And so some of that correction is also part of your job. Hopefully not a lot, but
yeah. Essentially, anything flies, you know, and you can use any tool. And again, we're dealing with the 2-track. So anything I put on it, there's always a compromise. Like if I add a certain set type of processing to take care of something that I'm hearing, it's also going to have some side effects on a few other things. Yeah. So, with that in mind, pretty much there's no rules as in anything. But all mastering engineers have developed processes to sort of get from point A to point B rather quickly too. What's really, really important is when I'm listening, is my first listen is always like the best time that I can take notes on what I need to change, because as soon as I become acclimated to that recording, I start to lose objectivity a little bit.
So you're and we're going to get into your process a little bit later and actually show the audience some of your gear and how you're doing it. But you're actually kind of getting that gut reaction and writing down your notes, not like getting in the DAW and go, let's start tweaking or whatever. That's interesting to me, to getting that initial impression. So that leads me to my next question, which we are discussing. I know it's a very hot topic nowadays with AI mastering. For the people that are watching, you're probably familiar with services like Lander or eMastered, or there's probably several out there. And, you know, everybody says, or maybe even Isotope, you know, you're at a home studio and I know Isotope has their little mastering assistant. You run it through and everybody's like, this is sounding pretty darn good. Like, why do I still need a mastering engineer? I know that's like, you know, something going around in our industry at this point, especially people that are doing home studio recordings. But what value does a real mastering engineer still bring to the table? That's kind of what I want to know.
Well, I would say there's twofold here. If you're having to go to other mediums, not just have it be digital, like if you're having to go to CD still or vinyl, you need a mastering engineer to be able to handle all those assets. And ideally you want one mastering engineer to do it and not have to send it out to 2 different people to do one or the other formats, because there can be a lot of lost in translation with that process. And then, but that's just the practical thing is I consider mastering like we're the librarians of the project. You know, we handle all the metadata and then we handle all the formatting. So that's still really, really important.
Probably more important because there's no credits or anything on liner notes or anything anymore, right?
The other piece of the question is it's really nice to have an objective third party opinion with a lot of experience that has done a lot of records to be able to hear that little 200 hertz bump that you maybe have ignored for the last 2 months while working on the project.
And one thing we might have to say is a lot of people doing these home studio recordings don't have optimum environments to even be listening in, right? So they may not detect that
there's a lot
200 hertz.
I mean, there's a ton of low end that I end up clearing up because of people aren't even listening, you know, below 100, you know, sometimes 100 hertz or 80 hertz or 60 hertz, you know, like there's a lot of stuff that maybe people aren't hearing that, and the mixes are great. It's just, it may just be like a little lopsided because they actually aren't listening to that.
So check the frequency response of your monitors, look them up online, see how low they go. Like you said, you may be missing everything if you're just kind of on those little IKs or whatever, mixing stuff, you know? So good point.
And, but there's nothing wrong with it either. I don't think I hear great mixes that I'm literally like, not changing balances. I'm just correcting, you know, the idea is there and we can get it sort of dialed in, you know,
so, and then like you said, that attention to detail where that algorithm may or may not detect that, right?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is AI is always going to change something. Like it's always going to throw it through a processor no matter what.
Right.
There are a lot of times where, as I'm working on a full album, and a part of what a mastering engineer actually does is they program the spaces. If we're working on a whole album, we program the spaces between the songs. We actually can make that very musical. There's like a whole, there's a whole dark art to like, how do I space this and make it feel great, which you develop over. It's just like a, you know, like, the other piece of it is we really try to get the album to be as cohesive as possible and have it be a
tonally, dynamically,
a solid listen all the way through. And even like, I can even bump up some songs if I want to feel it, like if I want to feel the album sort of like
Right.
push me along.
Interesting.
And I think of it like a book, like I'm reading a book, and I'm going from chapter to chapter.
Sure.
And I wanna feel like some sort of a story, or like a vague story.
Sure.
Sometimes it may not
Sure.
connect, but so there's that piece of it. If we're doing a full album, like, and I want it to be a solid listen all the way through. I don't want the listener to ever have to like jump for the volume knob.
Yeah.
From song to song.
And so you said you teach, and just as an exercise, you'll run a mix through, like, for instance, Lander, and then you'll play them an actual project that you've worked on and do an A/B. And what do the students always observe in that?
We'll do an exact A/B where I'll master a song myself,
Yeah.
and then I'll run the master through Lander. And I want to preface this as in, like, sometimes Lander pulls out some really cool things.
Sure.
It has it's a really interesting perspective. But overall, with a human still can offer more attention to detail, and a human can choose not to touch something. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, if it's just thrown through a processor, I still consider Lander. This may be controversial.
No, hey, we're here.
I still consider Lander an actual bus process, like you were running stuff through a
master bus.
Yeah. It's a very smart one if the algorithm keeps getting smarter and smarter, of course.
Yes.
But the process of mastering isn't that. The process of mastering is actually transferring from the medium, from the mixed medium to the mode of distribution.
That's great insight.
You know,
because like everybody thinks I'm just mastering because I slap on a limiter on my master bus, and that's mastering, right?
I would say Lander, probably for a lot of people too, especially if you're budget conscious, or like, or if you're putting a song out for yourself, like, and it's not, you're not trying to like bankroll a career on it or whatever.
Right.
It's probably a really valuable, like, just tool, like just like you would with Ozone, like a processor that you could slap on at the end, and it would you would be in a relative ballpark of things, which I think that's great.
Sure.
But a lot of times I would say for really professional projects, there needs to be a lot more attention to detail, because there are a lot of nuances that it's in terms of depth, in terms of dynamics, in terms of, I mean, we could go on and on and on.
Well, I'll tell my own personal story. I sent you a mix at almost 2 years back, and I had just met Duncan, and I said I'm going to send it to a few mastering engineers. Also send it to E-Mastered, Lander, Ozone, and the real thing won. So there you go. We still know each other, right?
That's fine. That's awesome.
And so it's fascinating the way you describe it. And again, we're going to show your workflow here in just a minute. But I want to talk more about the master bus idea, staying on kind of the philosophy here. Mm-hmm. When you're getting mixes from a mix engineer or someone trying to mix in their bedroom, whatever level they're at, there's so many things you can slap on your master bus nowadays. Like, for instance, limiting, or doing like a small amount of compression or widening or whatever. Do you have any suggestions for maybe a mix engineer that's, I don't know, maybe has a few years under their belt? They don't consider themselves a professional, but how should they treat that master bus if they expect to send it to someone like you?
I would say just I know the heated mix thing is a real thing, and sending like a louder mix to the artist to reference is really good.
Sure.
Or is really what everybody.
It's for their approval of the mix or whatever. Yeah.
The way the world has sort of operated. But if I can get both the heated and then an unlimited version,
so that you can see what they're kind of going for,
and I know what the artist has been listening to.
Sure.
Those are the best options. I know there's no way around to tell somebody not to do a heated one.
Right.
And I totally understand why it exists.
Right.
But sending something that's really, really non-dynamic or has been pushed into a limiter, it really ties my hands pretty hard.
Makes sense.
But if I don't get it, if I don't hear what that heated mix is, and I don't understand what the artist has been sort of used to, then I could potentially create something that's different.
Yeah.
Or could potentially like shift the project in a different direction.
Makes sense.
So that there's that end of it. We deal with that a lot. But I want to encourage, like, there are times too where I get a mix where a a mix engineer who really knows what he's doing will push into a limiter, and it actually sounds really good. It sounds really, really good.
But this is someone that does it day in, day out, a professional, right?
Yeah.
And I think most of the people I watch, I mean, obviously we have all levels, but are people that, they mix maybe as a kind of a necessity to get their songs out there.
Sure.
And so that's great. And then so following with that, is there certain like LUFS levels or, like -18 or anything you're looking for on your end?
Really the levels are, while I look at all the levels and I do all these things, I just need roughly 6 to 3 dB of headroom. And these days I can even work with 2, like it, as long as we don't touch 0 dBFS,
right,
and there's no like audible clipping, I can manage that. But I like to have like at least 3 dB of headroom. And at this point, in reality, like if I don't, I'm gonna pull it down,
sure,
and do my manual normalize,
right,
and get it. And especially if I'm going out of the box, I'm gonna pull it down to a certain level so I can feed it through the gear properly.
Makes sense.
So in reality, as long as it's not clipping, it actually doesn't matter because I'm still going to pull it down anyways.
Yeah, and again, for our viewers that don't know, that analog gear is designated to perform optimally at a certain level, right? And so if you're not at that level, you're going to have to take it down before you send it through. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. So we got to go to a quick little commercial thing, but thank you for watching, and we'll be right back.
Pete Lyman said this best. There's another mastering engineer in town. If I had a really good limiter and an EQ, just those two pieces, I could make an album.
Do a lot.
It's sort of like the Desert Island two pieces.
Sure.
A really good limiter that has really, really versatile, and I use pretty much at the end of my chain a lot is the Tokyo Dawn limiter. And
is that one free, or it's not much money?
It's not terribly expensive, but it's actually really transparent.
Interesting.
And it's true peak. It's true peak. It's got some really cool features in that world. I use a lot of other things as well with that. But that if I had a choice as a Desert Island, it's got a compressor, it's got a high frequency limiter built into it, and it's got a clipper and a peak limiter.
So can you build the chain? Can you compress then limit, or
it's kind of its own chain in one, and it's got all those little pieces inside of it. And I end up typically only using like little slivers of it because I have other things that but if I were on a desert island, it would have everything in it that I needed.
Wow.
If I need it.
Tokyo Dawn, and what's it called again?
It's the TDL limiter. Okay. The TDL6 is what I have.
Okay.
They probably have an update. They probably have an update for it now, but
that's a whole nother story. Trying to keep up with updates. Okay, and then so an EQ. Obviously, are you using a EQ without like phase shift for mastering?
Yeah, I try to do linear, but at some point, it's funny. I kind of like try to forget about that and just listen to things. Sometimes like the non-linears sound really great, and sometimes the phase shift actually works in your favor. I know that's controversial too.
No, hey man, if it sounds good, like you said.
So I try to be conscious of a lot of that, but at the same time, like for instance, the fab filter in the non-linear function sounds amazing. It's not terribly colored. But I use it in linear as well. The linear has a lot more transparency to it, but sometimes it can feel stale.
Sure.
Like sometimes the phase shift actually does some things. I sort of flip in and out and sort of listen at times. And so I use both a lot.
To transition to the hardware, if you really want color with an EQ, are you going to go outside the box?
Pretty much. My desk is actually not a non-colored desk. It's quite funny. I've kind of like done the opposite. I've created a really clean sounding desk, and then I do a lot of color in the box.
Interesting. So if you wanted to get some more color in the box, what EQ might you go to?
Actually, that split EQ, it's not necessarily color, but because I can split the transient and then the body of the sound, I can actually add more bulk to the sound if I want. That's really great for additive stuff because you can add stuff in I can add stuff in at a larger decibel level, but I'm not grabbing the transient with it, or I'm doing the opposite. I'm boosting the transient, but not grabbing the whole body of the sound. And so I can really shift tonalities without the mix really feeling like it moves. The cool. idea of the mix sometimes feels like this is artsy.
Yeah.
It feels like the idea of the mix still stays intact, but I'm able to actually have a lot more control with adjusting the transient versus the body of the sound. And I can like sort of open like the mid-range up a bit more without really just boosting something out,
And for our audience that doesn't know, because I'm going to give a shout out to Eventide, because I do give an educational discount students. Again, it's probably like 2 or 3 years old. It's not that old. And again, it allows you to split the transients and then the tonal information and do things with both, right?
And I don't think it was designed for mastering at all. Because it has a panning thing where you can like pan the transient one direction, which is useless to me. But
maybe a strummed acoustic guitar if you wanted. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something.
I'm sure if I mention it now, somebody's gonna be like, you could do this with it, and it's like, I'm like, please, I'm all open.
Speaking with EQ plugins, one more question: have you noticed any like over soothing? Like, and I mean the plugins soothe people. Like I heard the people that actually make soothe. I know it's kind of like what a multi-band EQ, or it dips where there's issues with resonance, but people can over soothe the mix. I know a lot of people are.
Yeah, I haven't had too many things where I felt like, but I do have the plugin and I do use it occasionally. Yeah. Like anything, if you go too far with it, it just kind of like it becomes anemic, sounding. That plugin's really interesting. I tend to. It's like a tool. It's like a Swiss Army knife.
What would you use it for in mastering?
I would use it a lot of my world. There have been times that I've used it to control some low end resonances. But mostly like all of that, I kind of like put it in my de-esser library. So I have like 3 de-ess plugins that I kind of bounce between depending on what the project needs, and I kind of like what's going to be the best for what's going on. Yeah. So like I have the Weiss de-esser from Softtube. I have a really unknown one is the Hoffa de-esser.
Interesting.
From Hoffa. They make DDP software. Okay. And like third-party DDP software, but they have like their own plugin suite that you can buy independently. Wow. And their de-esser is really, really simple. It looks really like the user interface is really simple, but it's really transparent. And I actually use it. That's the one that I use the most in its bus mode. So,
and you keep bringing up questions, so I'm going to stay on the software topic just for a minute longer. The Weiss stuff. Because 10 years ago, I used to walk into any mastering studio and I was like, the Weiss. Yeah. It's all there. But I've heard the in the box is, pretty good. Have you tried it?
From what I understand with the EQ, the Weiss EQ, because it was already a digital piece, they actually took the code that was in the digital piece, and it's supposed to be a 1-to-1 transfer for the plugin versus what the actual device is. Yeah. That's what I understand. I can't. There's a few new pieces that they've created out of the Weiss camp that were never actual hardware pieces, so I can't speak for any of that.
It's evolved a little bit more.
But it definitely has like a Weiss. Yeah. If you've ever used, I've used Weiss hardware before. There is definitely like, Bob Katz might kill me for saying this, but there's definitely like a Weiss. It's not a color. Yeah. It's not even a color. It's like there's something that it imparts on it that's really just clean and beautiful. Sure. So, but it definitely feels like the Weiss thing. Yeah. And the de-esser feels that way too. Right. I feel like it has a certain way that it goes about treating the audio that has like, that again, it's another tool in your toolbox. Yeah. Like that color is right for this, and it's not, I say color, it's not really color. It's just really minute. Something.
Something that it adds because we're running it through it. Yeah. And then last question, software for just fixing stuff. So RX, would that be your go-to? Or are there other things?
I use RX a lot for ticks and
Isotope, by the way. Yeah. We're talking about.
I use that on a daily basis. One thing that people don't really talk about a lot that I've found, John Mayfield, Mayfield Mastering here in Nashville, has brought this up in a video on YouTube and kind of sent me down a rabbit hole, is adaptive phase rotation. And have you ever seen? Have you ever cut horn? You've probably cut horns before. Have you ever seen where the phase relationship goes above the line and it keeps going and it kind of comes down?
Because a mic bleed when we're talking several mics together, or
it's like the computer can't track phase properly, or it has to John is way more educated on this than I am at the moment. But the computer, by correcting for adaptive phase rotation, the computer can actually correct for that phase anomaly that the computer is tracking.
Wow.
But it doesn't actually change the sound at all, but it can like correct the waveform.
Interesting.
And
within one solid waveform, and then we're kind of splitting it apart or whatever.
Yeah, and because of, if you correct for that, you can actually get a lot more headroom for the processing in the computer.
So what is there a plugin for that?
Yeah, it's just the phase plugin in the RX toolbox,
wow.
in the standalone RX.
Great.
And you can actually check how the rotation is out of phase with it, out of itself. You can actually just hit suggest and it'll analyze the track.
I'm gonna check that out.
And you can actually analyze pieces of the track and change that as well.
Yeah.
And
crazy.
On stuff that's kind of like has a lot of phase things going on in it. If I correct a lot, I usually can get almost 3 dB more of processing headroom.
Wow.
But when you listen to it, you don't hear a change. Like, it actually changes just the relationship of how the computer sees it. It sees
crazy.
So
wow, I'll have to check that out.
And I use that a lot.
Probably just ignored that on RX.
Right? Well, it's not. Nobody.
Yeah.
John is the only guy that I've heard talk about it, and then there's another guy who was on Lid Shaw's podcast, Dr. Ford. He works. I've never met him in person, but he talks about it as well on Lid's podcast. But those are the only two people that I've heard really talk about it. And I started trying and experimenting, and it was like, oh wow, this makes a difference. So.
All right, let's move to hardware. That was great. Yeah. I learned a lot of things about software there. So obviously we're in the mastering camp. Everybody's going to see.
One more thing about software. The difference that there's a lot of mastering engineers who work within Pro Tools and Logic and that whole thing. I don't know if I come from an old school camp, but I have to have a software that you can actually create a DDP in, and for workflow wise, if you're going to do mastering, I highly recommend looking into something like Sequoia's Magic or Wavelab or Pyramix. Programs that are not that actually cater to like creating album projects and dropping markers and being able to split your tracks.
Can you explain to our audience that may not know what a DDP is and the purpose?
So a DDP is the CD, the
final
file,
delivery.
the final delivery that you can deliver a zip file to a CD plant, and it houses all of the data that's needed to create the glass master for the CD. But that DDP workflow is really, really really efficient to work even when you're not even working with CDs. Yeah. It's like you can drop track markers, you can type in all the metadata associated with that track, where Pro Tools and Logic don't really provide the easy solutions for any of that. So it's really, really hard to have like an album workflow work out in Pro Tools and Logic. So and there's nothing wrong with mastering in those DAWs. I'm not saying that, but I would have a hard time staying efficient if I was trying to master in those.
So then is everything staying, and this is just my newbie question, I'm not a mastering engineer. Does everything stay, and maybe we'll see this later, but if you're doing an album on one track and you're automating the plugins, or do you have a separate track for each song? So
the cool thing about I use Wavelab, but you can do this in the other programs too pretty efficiently, is I can actually, each region that you have in a track can get its own plugins. Okay, gotcha. So you don't have to add a new track and put different plugins on that new track. You don't have to do there's a stair step method that a lot of and there's not. I say all this. Wrong with doing any of that.
That's how I would do it, because I'm like Mr. Pro Tools, and I'm not familiar with those.
But you can leave everything in one track, and then you can apply plugins to the actual regions inside of the track. Yeah. And Wavelab actually has these different compartments where you can actually, they call it a clip and not a region, depending on what. Wavelab has these awesome compartments where you can actually have a sort of a plugin waterfall where you can add plugins to the clip itself, and then you can add
to the overall
plugins to the track, and then you can add a plugin to a master section. And so you have these three compartments, and you can kind of workflow it like a console.
Interesting. Now I feel bad for sending you stem masters, because that probably makes it even more complex, right?
I have you're all set up. So, And the one thing that I want to say, we were talking about AI. Yeah. A lot of times when I master, I actually break the song down into a number of different clips that have really nice crossfades. So, and I will apply different plugins even within a different song or a different clip or a different plugin settings as we move along.
So what would be an example of that? Like,
like if the chorus is a really, really thick sounding, but the verses are really, really thin, I can have a different EQ settings when we shift from chorus to verse.
Yeah.
Oh, most of the time I'm just adjusting. I split up the clips and I'm just almost like you would do in automation, but it gives me a little more control, and I actually adjust the levels from in the songs.
So AI is not going to do that for you, at least right now. Right?
The AI is just going to smatter something across the whole.
I see what you're saying.
Song, but I go through and adjust different parts of the song.
Wow, that's cool.
If it needs it, of course.
Yeah. Wow. A lot to learn.
Yeah.
What about another thing about now you're talking about metadata? ISRC stuff. Is it your job as the mastering engineer to go get those, or should a client deliver those to you?
It can be my job, and I'm a low volume ISRC manager with the RIAA.
Okay.
So I can provide artist ISRC codes if they need them.
Yeah.
We were sort of in the Wild West with making CDs and then it going up onto like whether an artist is using like an aggregator, like with like DistroKid or CD Baby or whatever. I became an ISRC manager because a lot of times the CD had to release with the digital release.
Yes.
And so I had to be able to provide codes to go on the CD and then go for the digital release before the release.
Right.
Otherwise, we would have to wait for the CD to be released
and embed
and get the codes from DistroKid or that, and it became this like weird like cat and mouse game.
So you just went ahead and got that,
and I just went ahead and took care of it so I could provide that in those specific situations. If you're just doing a digital release, it's easier to get codes from the distributor, and they can manage it, and then it's all kind of included in that. But So
cool.
And I just provide that as a service. I don't charge. I'm actually not allowed to charge for it. So it's just a service that's provided. So,
very cool.
Yeah,
so speaking of George Massenberg and hardware, I heard you see a GML there. Let's move to hardware. And gosh, man, you got it all. You got the Soundtech. Okay, but our audience can't see it. But going back to the original question, Desert Island for mastering. 1 to 3 pieces of gear. Probably going to go back to the limiter and the EQ again, right? But
I have. But the SBL Hermes here is kind of a digital patch bay.
Okay.
It allows me to put any piece of gear in any order I want to on the desk. For example, let's define a chain, right? Mm-hmm. So, Dave, let's say you want the Soundtech first in line, which is this EQ right here. So Soundtech I have on C. So if I hit C, it's a Soundtech.
Oh, great.
And then it goes into the path number 1. And then let's say we want the GML 8900 compressor.
Yeah.
Right? So then I hit D here, and I put that in. It says GML 8900. And then it goes into the second path. And then let's say that's all we want. We say we have a really great sounding track. And then I just want to I have the Mazalek limiter right here, a high frequency limiter, and let's say I want to put that on, so I'll put that that's on G MPL2, and then that goes into the third path, and that will be my chain for that, either that song or what I'm working on.
Great.
And that's that chain. But if I wanted to move those around, I could just take those out, and say I wanted to compress before EQ, I could put the GML in before the Soundtech right there, and then you see how those numbers switch, and then I can go back, have the limiter at the end.
That's so great. So maybe we could just go through some of your pieces here, and you kind of tell me how you think about them, and we'll just kind of count these as your 5 or 6 analog processors, right? Because you own them. But should we start from? Well, we started from there.
So this is the actual This here is the SBL DMC with a Hermes connected to it.
Okay.
And it's the actual transfer console. So it's actually got a giant fader on it for the final transfer. So everything runs basically everything in the studio runs in and out of that.
Yeah.
So if we're just working on a digital thing, I have a D to A input and output through.
And then you're printing back in the box.
Yes, that would be
for digital.
Yeah. And then the gear is kind of interfaced through that.
Okay.
And then this is just the monitor section for the desk. So this is kind of the central hub. It's like the actual master transfer console.
Okay.
And then all the other stuff is just sort of like these satellites, pieces that I can add or not use if I want to, right? So I kind of broken up the console into two ways. I have a solid state path where I have a solid state EQ with a solid state compressor.
Yes.
And then I have a tube path with the Millennia stuff.
Yeah.
Where a tube EQ and a tube compressor. So
okay, so starting at square one as a mastering engineer, you're thinking that side maybe color beef for the...
Yeah, it definitely has a different flavor.
Yeah,
of course.
And then here is more just transparent, like
but
you said.
The Millennium stuff is actually fairly clean.
Right.
And the GML and the Soundtech are even cleaner. So.
Yeah, right.
But these have like sort of a... I do a lot of broad strokes with the tube stuff.
Makes sense.
And kind of like I'm able to and the tubes kind of I can gain a lot of depth with. So I can gain a lot of like depth to the image of that. And also this compressor is really, really cool. It's just a slow opto compressor.
Mm-hmm.
And I for some reason if I have a track that has like heavy kick drum in it, it really is awesome to like control that, but it also still helps the kick drum poke through. I actually don't know how to explain what it does. It's something. So
just hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then your TC thing in the middle.
Oh, that's just a meter. That's just I can do all the meter. I can look at anything I want to meter on the TC, and I don't have to do that. I have everything in WaveLab, but sometimes it's just nice to have something in front of you rather than looking at a screen.
And speaking of screens, I noticed you have two screens.
Yes.
So is that just to save some real estate there? Or
I actually
provide more real estate?
I still do an old school pitch and catch system, or I like to call it a source to destination system, where I have a source computer and then a destination computer. Makes sense. I'm actually I send from the links into the Prism when I'm working out of the box.
Yeah.
And
I have that same links. That's a great one. 32
great.
channels, but do you need 32 channels?
I have the 8 channel.
Oh, okay, 8 channel. Yeah. Do you need 8 channels maybe for stem? Or?
I do because I send a side chain to the GML. So I need, and then so what I do is I send a dry mix to the desk so I can hear the mix on its own. And then I send what I'm processing through the desk and then capture. So that's another 2 channels.
Yeah.
And then I send a side chain to the GML, which is 2. So I use 6 out of the 8.
Right.
So that's why I need an 8 channel. And then I capture with a 2 channel one as well.
I'm going to put our camera back.
Yeah.
Should we talk about this real quick?
Yeah, we can talk through this. This is so I have a set of Doug Sachs line amps here from the mastering lab. And these specific ones came from Stephen Markison in LA. And I was able to purchase them through another tech here in Nashville. And they're just a set of tube line amps that you can run through as some sort of I wouldn't say they're colorful, but they definitely do something to the mid-range and smooth out mid-range.
Yeah.
And I really, really like them. And they end up being the front end of the console on most big album projects. They're just tube line amps. They don't even have controls on them. You just run them through and they're line level. This is the E-Tech high frequency and low frequency limiter. Okay. And it's just split into 2 bands, and it's essentially I use it. It's kind of like a very mild de-esser. It was originally designed to protect cutter heads on lathes, and it's really, really. I use it both in vinyl cutting and in digital, and it's just like a very, very transparent. It kind of strips away some of the transient that's kind of gross with some really digital sounding stuff, and it just is. It does it in a way where I almost forget that it's on sometimes. Yeah, and it just is it's kind of like I use it all the time. It's like this would be one of my desert island pieces. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, and then I have the Mazalek MPL2 limiter. As well, which also has an high frequency limiter as well in it. So this is a brick wall limiter with a high frequency section on it, and I can flip that into MS mode if I want to as well. So a lot of times what I do is like I'll actually run this very light across the stereo, and then if there's a vocal that's kind of poking through, I'll actually flip this into MS and I'll run the 2 high frequency limiters together, which is really, really fun to do, and it kind of like really makes the track sound really well polished. So
cool.
Yeah.
Hey, tell me while we're talking gear, and I got a light right in my face, but tell me about kind of your monitoring system and And maybe the idea behind the design of a mastering studio for those that don't know,
Sure.
versus just a recording studio.
Well, we want the room to have a certain frequency response and flatness to it, where the room is just doesn't introduce any sort of coloration.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've worked really hard in this room. I have bass traps in all four corners. We have the cloud. We have diffusion in certain places to sort of get the room to have a certain EQ curve that makes it as transparent as humanly possible. There are a few things that you have to work around with physics that you're never going to be able to get rid of. But I've gotten this room pretty dialed really well to a certain frequency response through measurement.
Sure.
So
I might take a shot at the other side. Just a second.
Please.
Sometimes you just fall into stuff while we're talking about hardware. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Now this is gonna be better.
Here, I can get out of the way of the diffusers. So.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're looking at the other side of your room here. And let's actually move left to right.
Yeah.
So my left. Let's talk about why a tape machine in a mastering studio.
I do a fair amount of restoration work, and sometimes I'll get older tapes in, and I'll be able to transfer them. That is a special tape machine, and it actually doesn't have a record head on it. It's just a playback machine, and it was designed for cutting lacquer because it actually has a preview. The second head on it. Or the first head on it is a preview path to send to the lathe computer so that the lathe can have a look ahead, which is a whole other thing we don't have to get into. So this is a Mara machine. Chris Mara restored this. And I have both quarter-inch heads and half-inch heads for if a tape was able to came my way, I could potentially either digitize it or we could cut it straight to analog on the lathe. So... a lot of mastering too is I do a fair amount of restoration work. I've had a few clients in the past where I've transferred a lot of DAT tapes for clients, and as well I've where master tapes don't exist and the records still exist, we've transferred records and digitized them and cleaned them up with RX.
So your diffusers, I'm going right to left, and I see your air conditioning unit. Let's talk about that in the studio. That's kind of something people never think about, right? Yeah,
this we try to get the most silent because this is a small room,
right?
And for budgetary reasons, this was these mini splits was the best option, and it still makes a tad bit of noise,
right.
But this is one of the more silent ones that we could find running, but. In Nashville, the summers get really hot, so I have to do that. And I also have to keep the lacquers at a certain temperature as well.
Sure. So, well, let's move on to that big canister of nitrogen over there. Can you tell us a little bit why that's there?
This is nitrogen. I have to use nitrogen to clean off the lacquers.
Okay.
I can't use compressed air because there inherently will be a bit of water in the, and I can't blow off that. So I have to use nitrogen as a clean air to clean off these lacquers before and after I cut.
Okay. And I know you've been on a lathe journey lately, so can you tell us a little bit about that without...
Sure. No. This is a silly toe cutting lathe. Earlier this year, I was able to bring 2 back from Australia.
Right.
We shipped them home. I flew to Australia for a week and learned how to use the machine, take it apart, put it back together, take it apart, put it back together. and I've transitioned my business into starting to cut lacquers for clients. So,
awesome.
This is the first product to come to market. An actual manufactured product since Neumann made its last lathes in 1982.
Wow.
There have been people who have made like one-off products. Then there's a few people that are making lathes, but they're kind of like DIY kits, or they're making them for customized purposes. But this is really the first one, and some of those are designed not to do lacquer. They're designed to cut plastic or all of that. This is the first one that's designed just to do lacquer and kind of get us back to having a new lathe product for full reproduction, where like the lacquer will go to be plated and the plate will be pressed, from there. So we're really, really happy. This is serial number 3 of this machine. And the one I brought to New York is serial number 6. And we're kind of still in the beta phases of getting this up and running. And I've done a ton of test cuts here. And we'll be making, I'll be ready to go probably in another month to put out full products for people.
Wow,
so,
crazy.
Yeah.
So the main concern for a mastering engineer, maybe you can relate maybe 2 or 3 of the top concerns of going from a digital workflow or workspace to a cutting. Obviously low end is one of them, right?
Yes. Yeah, it all depends on the program material, and like side time, everything, because everything on a disc is real estate, right?
Gotcha.
So like it all depends on how loud the program material is, how loud we want the program material to be. There's a whole new education that I've had, and not to get deep in the weeds on this.
Sure.
There's what's called like disc level, which is a level that's not relatable to anything. It's how loud you can get the program material without inducing any issues on the disc, right? So learning how to navigate all that, it's different from project to project to project. And when you listen to one record from another, it'll have slightly different loudnesses, all that sort of thing. There's no standard across that because it's all program dependent. But essentially is if you're, and however your machine's going to cut it, because each machine is a little different too. The more low end you have, the bigger the groove you're going to make, right? So the more space it's going to take up, the less side time you have. So as a cutting engineer, you kind of have to go through and make all these adjustments to sort of accommodate all these factors to be able to get to cut the proper side time that's needed with then the information that's actually in there. So, and there's a lot of high frequency considerations that you have to go through too.
Wow.
And then you try to, with all of that, then you try to get it to at least in my opinion, from the time that I've spent with it, is you try to really get what the digital and what's on the vinyl to have some sort of representation of each other.
Right.
They're not going to be the same at all because we're actually on a physical medium,
Sure.
right? Like almost like it has a sound imprint on its own. But we try to make the best judgment to be like, okay, this is comparable. What you're hearing on the disc is comparable to what's up online, at least in my opinion. Now, the goal here, what I'm doing with this machine, is to be able to, I always felt like, in my own head, I always felt really weird being a mastering engineer, creating the digital masters and then having to send it to another mastering engineer to cut it. And he's going to do a little bit of changing of it to get it to cut properly. That felt a little weird to me. So my goal with this whole endeavor is to be able to take a project from start to finish through all the formats and really put that care and time into having the digital and the vinyl have some sort of quality to each other where it's representative of the project as a whole, no matter what medium it's on.
What projects are you working on at the moment? I think you covered that a little bit with the lathe, that you're working to that, but I get something in I'm working on every day. I'm working on your catalog stuff. There's a really cool producer in Saginaw, Michigan by the name of Andy Reid. Yeah.
And he sends me a fair amount of album projects, and all of his stuff is really fun.
Wow.
Really fun to work on. He does like full albums for people, and it's really cool because it's like he mixes it, and I'm not getting stuff from like a ton of different mix engineers. It's like really consistent. It's really fun to I can get a little creative.
Get to know each other too.
Creative with it. Yeah.
Establish that relationship.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll check that out. But what should we check out of yours, like online, that maybe some records that you're proud of on Spotify, or on Apple Music? Let's be a little bit more generous.
There's a local band here called Mutual Groove, who I've done a fair amount of mastering for.
All right.
And there's some stuff on, I can send you a link to.
We can put it in the show notes.
I have selected works page.
Oh, do you?
As well? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
throw that on there. But maybe they could just Google you. Who knows? I mean, but find you if it's on your website too. We mentioned that. Okay, so speaking of records, where do you find new inspiration? Like, and that could be technical or otherwise, like books, movies.
A lot of it is. I'm a vinyl collector myself, so a lot of it is finding like obscure vinyl that of cool things. A lot of times I hear people talk about things and then I go listen to it and then I find like go down the rabbit hole of like this is related to this and then I find really cool projects otherwise, and I kind of just have these crazy Spotify lists of stuff that I don't want to forget, like that then I keep. So
well, and that's a good question too. When we were talking about like clients giving you the the non real messed up master, the clean master bus versus let's talk about references for a second. Like, do you keep references on your computer?
Yeah.
Or at this point you're like just in your head, or do they send you references or
more often than not, I always use a reference.
Okay.
And that's something that I learned at McGill pretty hard. We were always referencing, we always went into a session with something in mind already, just so we weren't out in left field, which is really easy for our ears to do. Yeah. So I have a giant folder on this computer where I have just WAV files of
and that's
things
another question I was going to ask you is in today's market, how do you get high quality references?
You got to rip from the CD. Yeah. I have a massive CD collection at home still, and I still seek out CDs when I can find them. Yeah. And that's the way that I can get a 44 116-bit, WAV file that's available. Yeah. Tidal is another great option. And then if it's something that I just can't find and I know it's up on Spotify, I will use Spotify, but Spotify is kind of my last resort for the quality of the streaming sort of situation. Yeah. So, but yeah, I try to, if it's like, it's a hierarchy. It's CD. If I can't get the CD, I go to Tidal. If it's not on Tidal, I go to,
Well, and then this goes to my next question. And this is going to be hard again. I'm limiting these, but 3 to 5 desert island albums.
Oh yeah. Definitely, Pat Metheny's Still Life Talking.
Ooh, okay.
Is one of my favorite, and this is some of
He's coming to town,
Yeah, I got tickets.
Oh, did you?
He's coming to Ryman.
You should. Did you mastered anything with Danny Gottlieb and his wife on it? They're here in Nashville too.
No, so, I haven't.
We'll get you hooked up.
Okay. That's kind of a personal one, but also kind of an audiophile sort of type. Record. Let's see. The Police's Ghost in the Machine. That Ted Jetson cut. Yeah. I have a first pressing of that. Really? And I have another audiophile version of it as well. Wow. Also, the Police are my Beatles, essentially. So like,
is that Hugh Padgham produced and all that? Okay.
Also, like you could tie synchronicity into that as well. But let's see what else.
It's good to know.
There's this one's not like necessarily an audiophile one, but there's I really like albums that I can listen to start from finish. Mm-hmm. There's only like Joan Osborne's Relish record.
Is that the one with God?
And
God was one of us.
It's not. It's funny enough.
That's the hit, right?
That's the hit. Funny enough, it's like it's my least favorite song on the record. It's a great song. But it's
that's a great record.
The whole other record is like there's other parts of it.
Saint something.
Yeah.
And all,
Saint Teresa.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. I remember that record.
For some reason, I just really like that record, and I like the way it's produced. Do you
remember who produced it?
Whitman. Okay. It's either his last name's Whitman.
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna go check that out again. I haven't listened to that in a while. That's a great record. Anything else? Or I mean, I know there's always something, right? But
I've discovered some recent things. I actually really fell in love with the band London Grammar.
I don't know them.
Oh, okay. They've had a few. They had a big song, but they have their first record, If I Wait. The first song on that track is Hey Now. Yeah. And it just feels really good. Tom Coyne mastered that before he passed away at Sterling. But there's something about that record that is really, it's kind of like very modern pop, but there's just something about it that's really well done.
Interesting. That's something for me to go check out.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now we're going to get to mistakes. A couple of mistakes you've made in the past that you would encourage others maybe not to make, or we can take it from the angle of if you're just getting started in this business, what mistakes do you not make?
I have full transparency. Yeah. I used to have a tendency to take on too much, and I would burn myself out.
Yeah,
and that comes from being the only person who could do certain things.
Sure.
Like the only guy who could record things. I also didn't want to ever. There was a lot of like, was it FOMO? Or
Yeah.
I always didn't want to miss an opportunity because I think growing up in a completely rural area and then trying to forge your way. Like I didn't want to like miss out on an opportunity, so I'd have the tendency to take on too much, and I've really tried to learn from that sort of thing and burn myself out. I always have a thing. I never miss a deadline.
Yeah.
And
so when you're first starting out, though, how do you say no to stuff? Because it's like you don't know what the
it is the most difficult thing, at least for me. It may not be for other people, but it's the most difficult thing to have to say no to projects. And certain things. And also like there's a lot of like I used to have some imposter confidence stuff. So if you feel like if you're a person starting out and you have some of that, try to find some mechanisms to work through some of that.
Do you have any advice there? Like, I mean,
just like having something like I'm a musician myself, so I would always go home and play bass.
Right.
And be like, oh, I can do these things, right? It's like sort of having something in your life that's just like a positive, like some people meditate, some people like for me, I play music.
But that can happen a lot in Nashville. We're in the big leagues. You look over there with anybody. If you're a guitar player, if you're an engineer, and you go, man, they're better than me. Like I could never do that. And so that's great advice, just to find something to handle it.
Yeah.
And then speaking of advice, and this may tie into what we've talked about. Is there one or two pieces of advice that someone gave you at a young age that really helped you navigate this business?
Yeah, this kind of ties into the last question. Is my dad always told me to always do one thing at a time.
Right.
Always
focus on the task at hand.
Take it, and then and in this day and age with all of our distraction, that has really really been great advice.
Yeah. You mean you're not like checking all your social
media? No. Well, and that urge to like want to check email, all that sort of thing. Yeah, it's like no. Well, in this game, like we have to be so focused on the. In mastering, you have to be so focused on the deepest of details, like finding listening for ticks and pops, finding edits, like listening for specific things, that you really have to be compartmentalize what you're doing and do one thing at a time. The other thing that I will say is what blew my mind when I thought I knew how to record until I got to McGill. Right. Is George Massenberg said, if it's too loud, turn it down. If it's too soft, turn it up, and that's how you mix. And that's it. That's all. I really thought about it deeply, and we talked about it a lot. And I'm like, wait, that's all EQ is. Yeah. Because you're just turning something down or turning something up, but in a different. That's all compression is.
Yep.
And that's all limiting. And like all of a sudden, it was like that's all we're doing is we're literally just turning things down or turning them up. Like in everything, like, and that sort of blew my mind.
That helps simplify it. To really kind of think of the task at hand. Gosh, I mean, there's so many other things we could talk about, but I want to get into the technical stuff a little bit, and you can kind of run us through a mastering scenario. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, so here we are, and I've asked Duncan to master something I own the copyright to. So this is an older song of mine for Sync Film TV, mixed by Tyler Norris. And so you're going to just show us how you would approach a fresh mix coming to you to master, correct?
Correct, yeah.
All right, so go for it.
Okay, so first and foremost, I'm going to verify my sample rate and bit rate that was supposedly sent to me. So I'm going to open up our X here, the standalone editor. And I'm going to go in and drag in the original file, and we can see it here, and I can verify that it's at 48K 24-bit. Sometimes somebody could export it wrong, and we just want to verify that it is what it is, and I can set my own stuff appropriately. Then next, what I'm going to do in RX here is I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at the adaptive phase rotation. So I'm going to, which is what we talked about earlier. I'm going to hit suggest here, and it's going to sort of spit out some numbers. And to see that we have a plus 30, meaning that there's some waveforms in this that can be corrected. So I'm going to go ahead and hit render on that with that plus 30. And we'll actually see the waveforms change here. So if I hit render, boop, you see it change, and you actually see that you gain more processing headroom by doing that just in the waveforms. But it doesn't change the sound of the recording whatsoever. It just kind of readjusts how the computer's interpreting the waveforms. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that, hit yes, it renders it. And then I'm going to drag this file. I would typically do that. I actually have an RX files folder, so I would drag this into like an RX, meaning that I've changed it. And I'd have original copy of that at some point. But so now I'm going to pull up Wavelab, and I'm going to pull in this file from this RX folder here. And now we have that file dragged in. And immediately what I'm going to do before I even listen to it, I'm going to just get myself in the ballpark, and I'm going to top and tail this. So I'm going to add 200 milliseconds to the front of this waveform, which is typical on a lot of mastering guys have their numbers. Everybody works within usually a 200 millisecond or a 300 millisecond window. It just adds just a small gap right at the beginning of the wave file, and it kind of allows for like maybe some slower players to pick up on it. We don't want the music to start right at 0 unless we're doing a seamless album, and then there's no way around it. But typically I add between 200 milliseconds or 300 milliseconds, and there's kind of an art in that too. Sometimes if it's a slower song, it's nicer to have a little bit of a longer pause. If it's a quicker start, I butt it right up against 200 milliseconds. It used to be in the old days too that some older CD players couldn't play a file like right away. So this has sort of been ingrained in a lot of mastering for the last a lot of years, that we just add a little piece of silence right at the beginning or clean that up. So I keep that. And it's nice for me, even if regardless of the CD era, it's really nice to if I hit spacebar, it's nice not to have music like immediately. It actually, there's some human element of having just a small pause before the music starts. That's really not jolting. Or,
it's almost like taking a breath before you get that first note, you know?
Yeah, like a horn player will take a breath, right? Like, so that's a great analogy. I'm going to use that. Can I use it? Yeah, can I steal that? You can steal it. Okay, so I immediately just get myself where I need to be with that, just to knock out things as we go. But I'll do a first listen here. I'll wait to tail that when we get through that, but I'll give this a listen.
Wake in the morning, stare out the window, got another day to keep going. I hear the whispers from every corner, all of them stones they throwing. No, but they never gonna hit me now. You know I'm gonna wanna show them all. Never stop, never give up, always gonna show them love. So I go up, yeah, gonna keep climbing up, yeah, gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, yeah, never stop trying. Oh baby, I'ma always keep fighting. No, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up.
Cool. And what I would do is I would actually do a full listen all the way through.
And we should point out that I'm capturing the room with a mic. We're not doing a direct, so obviously it's not like a huge critical listening, but we're really just going through your workflow here.
Sure. Okay, so from here, what I would do is, because I would actually get my loudness kind of set into the ballpark first, and before I would get sort of my limiter chain sort of set up and get it into kind of the loudness ballpark that I want to work within, and then I kind of will do all of my other changes from there. So it's kind of like it's almost like a top-down situation for pop stuff like this. So immediately I'm going to make sure that I have a true peak limiter with this. I'm just going to double check that everything's set properly. I have it set up in the template, but this just catches the true peaks right at the end. This is the Tokyo Dawn, that TDR6 limiter. And then...
so are you even thinking outside of the box now, or because it's pop, you're kind of like, it's all going to be inside
yeah,
the box?
for this one, I would stay in the box.
Okay.
And so I'll show you like my in-the-box workflow.
Sure.
Unless you want to know the box
No,
workflow.
it's fine.
Yeah,
I think it's better actually in the box because
Yeah.
most of our people watching aren't going to have the outboard gear you're going to have.
So I have the Fab L2, and then I have some sort of... I have 3 different clipper. One's not in here at the moment, but I have 3 different soft clip plugins that I can choose from. And so
soft clip harmonics, is that what we're going for, or
yeah, it's actually
saturation, or
sort of just lopping off the transient in some sort of a
musical way.
A different way than just cutting it off, right?
Right.
So I've actually grown pretty accustomed to. I have the Gold Clip here, which is a brand new plugin that came out this year that I really like. It sort of emulates the Lavery Gold.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea behind it, with a few other features now. And then I also have the Apogee soft limit here that actually I really like a lot. And this is because we have to probably get this track into a loudness range to be competitive or kind of all that, get it as loud as we can without having it fall apart.
Yes.
I that's the reason why I kind of have like I'm inducing soft clipping to get it. Yeah. So a lot of like the misnomer and the behind mastering, we to get something loud these days, to get it above a certain level, we have to somehow compromise the transient no matter what. So how in what flavor do we do that in so that it's either transparent, or maybe we don't want it to be transparent. But so I kind of set up this limiter chain kind of allows me to get into that ballpark.
That makes sense.
So
yeah.
And I have 3. I have another clipper plugin that I choose from. I use them as Swiss Army knives, try to figure out what's going to be the best.
So you're just listening real quick, like A-Bing.
Yeah.
Them.
So like, I'm gonna listen kind of to this chorus.
There were times when I wanted to quit. Gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, never stop trying. Oh, baby, I'ma always keep fighting. Oh, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up. The gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, never stop trying. Oh, baby, I'ma always keep fighting. Oh, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up.
So I sort of took I got like a kind of a volume boost from this Apogee soft clipper, and then I sort of been pushing into 2 different limiters, the L2 and then this final True Peak here. And I want to try to, I don't know, in the way that I work, I want to try to hit this as least as possible.
So are you shooting there on that for a certain dB, certain LUFS again?
So I try to just, because I know this room so well, I kind of know where something sounds like sort of a sweet spot. But if we want to get like really, really technical, I try not, LUFS is sort of like, LUFS is really ambiguous sometimes because not all frequencies are created equal inside of LUFS. And a lot of mastering engineers hate to use it because it doesn't actually give us the full idea. But because a lot of people talk about it, I try to I try to relate to what's going on in LUFS. So like we saw like in this fab filter limiter, really this limiter here is not providing us any loudness. It's just keeping us from like inner sample peaks from happening on some level. This limiter, we were actually seeing that we were hitting like -7 LUFS,
gotcha.
you know, like, and we probably will get up to the -6 range at some point. In the modern world, if you want something really, and that's LUF short term. Now there's all these different LUFS things. Without getting deep into, I try to just stay on short term because it seems to be the most reliable when I try to relate and talk to people. I like to use RMS and I like to use some other things. In WaveLab, I have the options of seeing a lot of different things here with different metering. But to relate to everybody else, because everybody likes to talk about LUFS, I kind of like the -10 LUFS range short term is kind of like the tipping point.
Gotcha.
You know, like if it's a little bit below that, it's really, I can preserve some transient information. It's a little more dynamic, but it's not as loud as a lot of competitive stuff. Once you tip over the minus LUFS, once you tip it over -10 LUFS short term, we now are getting into that modern.
That's interesting. I use stuff. When recording, I kind of use a -6 dB of gain reduction as you can hear it or not hear it.
Yeah.
So that's okay. I got you.
That makes sense. Yeah. And my whole go-to thing is like the Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk.
Yes.
Seems to be the bell curve where it sits nicely, kind of. Now it's gonna drift one way or another. Sure. It's not that everything's exactly at these numbers, you know, but it kind of sits in that -10 LUFS range, and it's not. It was designed to not be as loud as some other things.
It's a little vintage, so a little modern, and we meet in the middle, right?
Yeah, and so I use it as a bell curve, and I kind of say, do we want to tip this above this, or do we want to stay below this, or do we want to be right at it? I kind of that's a really fun track to sort of like, you know, and they purposely made that record, you know, from what I understand and what I've heard, they purposely made that record, you know, where the loudness that it is, you know, and actually serves for me like a great reference. So, anyways.
So moving past that, thank you. So you're kind of feeling it, but then if you you can relate it as well. Okay.
Yeah. From here, I kind of have it in a ballpark. I'm already there. I'm not lost. You know, I'm kind of like, okay, we're gonna land somewhere in this area. So then I kind of go back and I start with EQ and then work my way forward. You know, like. So
are you EQing by ear? Are you using something to show the resonances like the fab filter, or all the above?
If I hear something, I'll take a look. So I'm gonna add. I have a Hoffa EQ that actually has a really great readout on it. That I'll look for like low end resonance and like like if I hear something like a specific note. Yeah. Like I'll say, oh, that's like, you know, sort of thing. So like if I. Gonna keep climbing up, gonna keep shining up. So I can see like exactly where the low end is hitting here. And this track is actually really well mixed. There's a little bit in the mid range that I think I might want to. That I'm feeling like I really want to clean out, sort of in this area here. Yeah. That's kind of, it feels like slightly fuzzy sounding. Now I'm getting like really,
no, that's fine.
Really artsy. And then I'm gonna look at some of the low end here a little bit as well. But let me just listen to this for a second, and we'll go through and
stare out the window. Got another day to keep going. I hear the whispers from every corner. All of them stones they throwing. Never give up, always gonna show them love. So I go up, gonna keep climbing up, gonna keep shining.
The width on this is great.
Tyler Norris, shout
out. I'm gonna one thing that I use a lot is this Goodhertz mid-side plugin, but I actually don't use it for mid-side. I use it for the stereo width. And I'm just gonna hold this up slightly. And it's got a great, like, almost like elliptical EQ, like, which was something that I have on my desk where we can sum low end to, let's see, to mono, and I can clean up just some of the stuff below 60 there, just slightly. And we're gonna listen to the chorus. So I just sort of like opens it up slightly, and then the low end got a little bit ever so slightly tighter. Okay. Gonna keep climbing up, yeah. Gonna keep shining. And I'm gonna go. So that just sort of broadened the track and cleaned up some of the low end without actually inducing like a full EQ or like any sort of a high.
And were you feeling out the crossover point, or
yep.
were you just okay?
Yeah, I sort of go through and feel this out. Sometimes I'm up at like 80, sometimes I'm way down at 50. You know, like, and I don't do that for everything.
Sure.
For this pop stuff, it actually kind of helps it really like punch in that deeper thing. And I don't do a ton of car listens ever, but it kind of tightens up kind of that lobbiness in the car a little bit as well. Anyway, yeah. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my split EQ from Eventide, and I'm actually going to let's see, where are we? Because I'm actually putting this on the clip, I can't actually have it in the template because it doesn't have the clip already in it. So I have to go find these. That's the only downfall here with working quickly.
They're regions, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, these are. Yeah, so the plugin is actually on this region here. And if I had another region, these green, see how it says clip?
Yes.
Then I have, these are the plugins that are on the track that I have bypassed. This is my, and then the output is the actual final output for the whole session, which is where I have my limiter stuff. Yeah. So you kind of have this really cool like workflow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to use the split EQ and take out some of that mid-range stuff that I was hearing that, but not do it in a way where I'm disturbing the transient. So. Gonna keep climbing up the window, got another day to keep going. I hear the whispers from every corner. All of them. We can kind of see that her vocal is protruding in the 200 hertz area. I don't want to take too much away from that, but we can. Never give up, always gonna show them love. So I go up, yeah, gonna keep climbing up, yeah, gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, yeah, never stop trying. Oh, baby, I'ma always keep fighting. Oh, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up. So I'm taking away from the body here with this blue section, but I'm not actually taking down the transient with the EQ. So there were times when I wanted to quit. Sometimes I stopped. So then this is it bypassed. But there was a line inside me. I couldn't. And that's it. I can hear that. Yeah. And I'm doing it a lot here. Like I'm doing it. Looks like a dB and a half. Yeah. And in mastering, like if I do more than a half a dB, it's like really apparent. So this is like I'm not taking the full frequency down, I'm just taking that body but leaving the transient. Yes. So you can do a lot more. You have to do a lot more to make an impact with this EQ because you're not. Yeah. So it's really for mastering. It's been a game changer for me. I can actually sort of like really shift things, but I didn't really change it all that much. I think you may be one of the first to adopt it for mastering. Yeah. Get a testimonial from it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And one thing that I like to do, the awesome thing that I want to show you, I would like to show off here is that WaveLab has this cool thing called a reference track. So I can drag in the original mix here. And I can A/B it. Again, I have to match it up because I did that top at the beginning, but we'll just get this matched up really quickly, just as close as we can. I would match this exactly, but because I can actually in Wavelab I can see down to the sample if I zoom in far enough here, which I'll show you guys. So I can sample lock. You see, I can sample lock. I can sample lock like stems together too. So
quick reference question again.
Yeah.
You know, like I will say, as the writer and producer of this, you know, obviously it's a pretty apparent. We're thinking the Rihanna, the Sia wheelhouse. If I would have sent you a reference track, would have distracted or
no? It would actually
not?
put me in a. I would have it running here. So this is the Wavelabs reference track. So if I listen to this, I can just click this little ear.
Right.
And now we're listening to the mix. And now we're listening to the master. And this because this is a specific, it's actually a reference track. When I create a track, I go in and I can create like what's called a reference track here.
And it's not going through a chain.
It's not going. Important. It's not even going through the output. It's just sending straight to the converter.
Great.
So, and that's really something cool that Wavelab added in, I believe 9.5, and it was a request from a bunch of mastering engineers. Beautiful. So you could have it. So if I have a WAV file of your reference, I would just drop it in here and I'd have it running and I'd reference back and forth.
And that's the hard thing. How do I get a WAV file?
No, you're fine.
Working on it.
I run Spotify without the normalization and it's pretty close, you know. So it's Wake in the morning, all right. So from here. I hear the whispers from every corner. All of them stones they throwing, no, but they never gonna hit me now. You know I'm gonna wanna show them all. Never stop, never give up. Always gonna show them love. So I go up, gonna keep climbing up. And then I can actually level match this if I want to in this track and kind of see where my changes are. So if I gonna keep shining, oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down, so I go up, never stop trying, oh baby, I'ma always keep fighting. So even though this is sort of clipping a little bit, I sort of do a level match and check back and forth. I could always throw an L2 on this too, and actually that's what I would do is I would throw an L2 and like level match this, and then see what that's like. But for here I can kind of get a good. So I took a little bit of that sort of low mid stuff out very gently and kind of got the track to just be have a little more clarity in that area. Is really what I'm hearing when I level match this by hand. You know, and from there, that was really the biggest thing that was bothering me. I would probably check the low end a bit and make sure that that's all happy. This is actually a really well mixed track. I don't really. There were times when I wanted to quit. I think I would just kiss a de-esser with her vocal ever so slightly.
We like to make your job easy.
Yeah. Let's. But there was a line roaring inside me. I couldn't push it down. So now it's out and it's screaming loud. All these steps gonna shake the ground. Oh, there's no stopping me now. So I go up, gonna keep climbing up, gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, never stop trying. Oh, baby, I'ma always keep fighting. Oh, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up. I don't want to take away from the air, but there was a line roaring inside me. I couldn't push it down. So now it's out and it's screaming. Yeah, it just kind of like tucks it slightly, but we're not doing more than 2 dB, you know, with those hits. This is that little Hoffa de-esser that I was talking about. That's
great.
Super.
And so do you just set your range there between the frequencies you want to?
Yeah, and it's actually really good for like if you have like tambourine or hi-hat that's just going nuts, and I have the master, and there's no way I can you know, I can go up and sort of, it's super transparent. I've been really, really happy with this plugin. It's like a little gem it's really simple. Yeah. then here I'm going to try this to see if this is going to add anything.
I'ma keep climbing up.
There's a little bit of like crispiness kind of up at 3K area in this, and I'm wondering if I can sort of skirt around that with this, or I'll have to go back and EQ some stuff.
I'ma keep climbing up.
This is the overloud dopamine, and it's emulating the Dolby noise reduction units that I have the real ones here in the room for the tape machine, but there's a type of compression, which is expansion and compression that they do to do that, and they kind of play with that, and they actually turn it into like a little bit of a compressor and a little bit of like a sweetener. So sometimes I can get around some harshness with it, and it kind of adds some sparkle to the top. But I gotta get back to the chorus here, so you can see what it does.
Inside me, I couldn't push it down. So now it's out and it's screaming loud. All these steps gonna shake the ground. Oh, there's no stopping me now. Gonna go up, yeah. Gonna keep climbing up, yeah. Gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow me down. So I go up, yeah. Never stop trying. Oh, baby, I'ma always keep fighting. Oh, I'ma keep climbing up. I'ma keep climbing up. I stopped and I thought about it, but there was a lie roaring inside me. I couldn't push it down. So now it's out and it's screaming loud. All these steps gonna shake the ground. Oh, there's no stopping me now. Gonna go up, yeah. Gonna keep climbing up, yeah. Gonna keep shining. Oh, you ain't never gonna slow.
Yeah, so from here I would go back and kind of readjust my low end. There's a little bit kind of going on in the upper top end that I would fuss about with probably either with a DS, or I'd go in and like sort of EQ that down.
Yeah.
Maybe try it with that split EQ. Maybe try the transient in that area. But other than that, I'm kind of like exactly where I want to, be. And now it's just like fussing with the little minute details to get this as clean and open as possible.
So, two questions that came up, and
Yeah.
I'll just look over your shoulder here. First of all, how long, these are more general questions, how long does a typical track take you? Like under an hour, or do you not, it's hard to put time limits on it?
I would say it kind of average, when I look at my data over the year, I average a song an hour.
Okay.
Typically,
Makes sense.
some songs will take 3 hours, some songs will take 15 minutes.
And you said that's the hard thing about the job is you have to keep moving, right?
Yeah,
And
you definitely have to. You have to like keep because of the like I don't know, mix engineer will probably do a mix in a morning session or take a day to do a mix, somewhere in there.
Sure.
In mastering, we have to work on a whole record, so like I'll do a record in a day or a day and a half ish, sort of in that realm. So when you average that out over a workday, it's roughly a song an hour.
Yeah. And then the next question I had for you is, how long did it take you to really know your room?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Probably it took me 2 years, but I wasn't working full time at that time. But I was in here like every other night.
So that's maybe a benefit of starting out part time. You really had some time to acclimate.
Yeah, and I was working with clients. I was really growing my client base organically, and working with people that I wanted to work with. And in that, we were able to build trust and sort of work through hey, how does this feel? How's this sound? So I really got to know my room in that way really well.
So then why do mastering engineers ever want to move?
Yeah.
You get used to the room.
It's tough. Yeah. And it's tough to when you swap something out, you really notice the difference. Yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, that, I want to be I think I might try it again. I tried the Manly Massive Passive in here. And I don't know if it's the classical boy in me, but I popped it in and it was like popping a compressor on. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that changed everything. I was like, I got so now that I've gotten accustomed to having some tube stuff in here, I think I'll give it another shot and actually want to really play with it again. But it was like at the time that I was doing it, I had such a clean console that I was like, whoa, like this is just like it
No, I hear
just totally like changed the whole environment, you know,
Yeah.
on some level. And but that was you know, the point is that like when you get so used to it, when you induce something new, you can really feel the change.
Yeah.
Even just changing out the cabling, going from the console to the amplifier, I switched over to Grimm cable,
Mm-hmm.
and that like I was like I didn't think I'd noticed that big of a change with cabling, but it like everything just, I couldn't even describe what happened. Everything just felt more natural.
Wow.
And like it like settled a little better. Like it didn't feel as pokey sometimes. Yeah. And I was like, oh wow. Like, and that's just the cabling from the console to the amp.
That's great. I mean, just all those small, but you know, your room is accurate if that's making a huge change.
Yeah.
Last thing, finishing up.
Sure.
I think a lot of people need to hear this that are watching this show. You are the last step in quality control as a mastering engineer, right?
Exactly.
So you told me you literally listen through everything that you're printing.
So what I would do here is I will add these. I'll show you guys just really quickly. I add a marker here for the top of the song, and then I add a marker where the song will end. And then if we were on an album, this would be there would be another song that starts, and that marker would cue the switching of the actual digital files when I render out. But if we go, I'll bump that up, and then I would listen to the ending of this and tail it with some sort of a nice, you know, what depending on how it ends and what the mix engineer did on his side. And then from there, I render this out, and send it out. It would get bounced out at, because this is at 48, it would get bounced out at a 48, 32-bit file. And then I have some batch software that'll convert that down to what I need to deliver. But then...
So even when you're doing this, you're still going through the converter, like the two-computer approach, right? And printing on the other computer?
Nope. We're in the box here, so I'm just on one computer. Okay. So I'm just on one computer in WaveLab, so I'm just literally exporting like you would in Logic or Pro Tools in this situation. But once I export that and then I get it converted down, like, because this spits out at a 32-bit file because I'm running everything at 32 bits. I then have a batch processor that'll downsample this with a few other plugins like a dither and, you know, sample rate conversion, all that sort of thing. Then from there, I go through and I listen to that file. Right before that's right about as I'm about to send to the client, I will go through and give that a full listen before it leaves and make sure that everything is.
And labeling everything.
And
then
labeling
we didn't even
properly.
talk about embedding all the metadata, but that's a whole nother thing.
The cool thing is these markers actually, because of I have a custom script I have a script that, well, actually, when I load it, this is the metadata script that actually I took from Justin Perkins, is another mastering engineer in Milwaukee. He has WaveLab tutorials, and he provides some really great metadata scripts that just load, and so it steals. If I go in and type CD data in to that, like we have title, performer, all that, that metadata then shuffles whatever I type into the CD editor. It shuffles it to like a riff file and an ID3 tag and all that, so I only have to type in things once. And then that's embedded into whatever I get rendered out, and that's on that file. So
awesome.
Yeah.
But just that quality control. That's really another thing I never kind of realized. Really kind of the last stage before the whole public hears it. So if you miss a click or a pop or anything like that.
Yeah. So that's as many times as you can listen to it objectively. You'll be able to catch all that stuff. And
you mentioned one other thing, and I was maybe this is an old school question. Dither. A lot of people aren't aware, like on the master bus, you know, if they put like an L2 or they put the fab filter limiter, that some of that is auto dithered. Obviously, does it really matter if that's on or not on your end anymore? I
make sure that stuff is all turned off on those particular limiters.
But I'm saying a mixing engineer going to you.
Oh,
is that something that you tell people to kind of pay attention
to? I would say don't. The only time that you need a dither is if you're switching bit rates, right?
Yeah.
If you're not doing any of that and you're staying within the same bit depth. Try to have all that stuff off.
I think a lot of people aren't aware though.
Okay,
Some of those plugins, actually automatically put it on there. So
yeah, dither is only needed if you're switching bit rates, and really you should just work in the sample rate and bit rate that you're mixing in, and make sure that all that stuff is off, and send me
is
the
4824 preferred on your side.
Actually. Whatever you worked in, and this actually goes into the why I work out of the box a lot of times. Which, so whatever you mixed in, if it's a 4824 environment for the 9632 environment, whatever you worked in, I want what is ever going to be the highest resolution that you actually worked in. So you don't if you don't. If you worked if you convert up, you're just adding empty things into that, and it doesn't actually make any sort of difference whatsoever. Yeah. So whatever you worked in natively is what I want, and then I can work from there. I do what's called a poor man's upsample, where if I'm working out of the box, I'm gonna send stuff from one computer to the other converter. I got this from Sean Murphy when I worked with him at Tanglewood. He's a classical engineer who was a John Williams engineer.
Oh, wow.
Where I will he did it the other direction though. He downsampled orchestras through converters because it sounded better to do it through the analog conversion. But at the time, I think it was the converter technology at the time. But I will send stuff through the desk, and I will capture at a 96K bit. 96K sample rate. Yeah. And then I can guarantee if I work out of the client a 96K file, high resolution. That's a bit controversial in the mastering community. Sure. A lot of people say you should always just work at the native thing. But if I'm capturing analog off the desk, it doesn't matter. And then I can also hand the artist a really nice a real 96K file. So if I'm working out of the box, I will capture at 96K no matter what. But if I'm working in the box, I will work at the exact native sample rate that I got from the client.
That's cool to know too.
Yeah. So a lot of the catalog that I'm able to retain for all the clients, a lot of them are at 96K, even if they didn't start off that way. If I worked out of the box.
Okay, and finally, let's tackle that while you're here. Is it your job as a mastering engineer to? I mean, I think especially when people are starting out not to be organized or whatever, but you mean you actually got to hold on to this stuff and if someone needs a revision like 2 years later.
I have had calls. Hey, you know that song you worked on me 4 years ago? Yeah. Can we get it remastered, or can you insist that I lost my files? Can I get them? So I retain a living archive, where I have backup hard drives of, and each year gets a giant hard drive, and so all the files, all the assets, everything I get mixes, my DAW files, which I'm curious if they're going to open in 10 years or not. Yes. And my console prints, and then the final assets, the DDPs, the WAV files, the AIF files, anything that was needed, that was given to the client, all gets archived, and I can pull that project up.
And what about even immediate needs? When you master something for someone, do they have a chance to do a revision, or how do you handle those?
So I have a free revision policy still, which and I don't ever want anybody to walk out with something that they're not happy with or proud of, because it's at the end of the day, it's not my recording. Like I am a facilitator, and I am, again, what mastering is, I'm the gap between the creative process and the manufacturing process or the distribution process. So I want to try to make that recording sound its absolute best that it can to live in the world. So and if we aren't there, then we can revise it. So the revision process is I'll do initial pass on things. I'll work with it. I'll send it to the artist. I'll send some artists the notes. They can give it a listen. I use a service called FilePass, where they're able to listen online, and an automatic invoice is generated and all that. So it's really clean, really simple for the artist. they can actually type notes. It looks like SoundCloud, so they
Yeah,
can
I've
actually
used that before.
they can actually
Cool.
drop
Yeah.
like timestamp markers and type in revision notes.
Yeah.
And I'll go back and we'll revise it, and we can usually we'll revise it until we get it right. You know, it's sort of that's what mastering is. Typically, I don't ever go past 2 revisions because typically we're able to knock out a lot of things, and for the most part, if the artist understands what they want and what they need, I'm able to really get it at least 90% to 95% there within the first pass, within the original pass. If not, a lot of times I'll get it right away. They'll just be like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing," you know. So I actually rarely ever go past 2 at this point. Yeah. I have had a few people take advantage of it, but a lot of times it was like people who was like mixing their first ever project, and so they didn't really know. I sort of helped walk them through the process sometimes, and really was able to be helpful to them on their end, you know. So, but a lot of times, like mix engineers who really make really good mixes, that we don't really have to go past 1 revision. So, even the 1 revision is like, hey, can you trim off like a second off the end, or like, or maybe 1 little frequency note, but that's about it. So.
Well, we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to wrap. So thank you so much for showing us all that, and we'll see y'all in a minute. Duncan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show. People can find you again at thevoltageexchange.com. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm at the Voltage Exchange on Instagram.
At the Voltage Exchange on Instagram.
Yeah.
Maybe we can even find your Spotify playlist online. If not, we're going to put it in the show notes.
It's public. It should be the Voltage Exchange selected works.
There you go.
Yeah,
Spotify.
Yeah.
Apple Music, though, right, too. And if you want high quality, we already talked about that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I just want to make sure everybody knows about you. You can take projects from all over the world. You're here. You have an amazing room. You can do digital. You can do vinyl. You can go from analog tape, do it all, right? All right, man. Thank you for teaching us about mastering.